The planet was quiet, too quiet. Wind moved across broken towers and empty streets, carrying dust and old whispers. Once this place had been full of life, full of voices and lights, but now it was nothing more than shadows of a forgotten world. In the middle of the ruins lived a young alien girl. Her name had been spoken by her parents long ago, but she did not hear it anymore. For years she had been alone, waiting for them to return, waiting for anyone to come back. She counted the stars every night, hoping a ship would appear, but the sky gave her nothing except silence. Her home was not a house anymore, only pieces of walls and a roof made from metal scraps. She had learned to survive, collecting water from broken pipes and finding small pieces of food left behind. But her heart grew tired, and sometimes she sat by the old streetlights, remembering when her people laughed here. The machines that hunted survivors kept her awake at night. They moved with red eyes and heavy steps, searching for movement, searching for life. If they found her, she knew they would destroy her. She learned to stay hidden, to breathe quietly, to walk like a shadow. Every day felt the same hunger, the same fear, the same silence. Sometimes she wanted to scream into the empty sky, but she knew it would only bring the machines closer. Her voice had become as quiet as the ruins themselves. One night, she climbed to the top of a broken tower. From there, she could see the horizon, endless and dark. She whispered to the stars, "Please, let someone find me." Her eyes filled with tears, but the stars gave no answer, only the cold light of distant suns. The days turned into years. Her body grew stronger from survival, but her heart felt weaker. Loneliness was heavier than hunger, heavier than fear. She dreamed of hearing her mother's voice again, of feeling her father's arms again. But dreams were only dreams, and every morning she woke to the same silence. Then something strange happened. She was sitting near the ruins of the old marketplace when the ground shook. At first she thought it was another machine, another hunter searching for her. But when she looked up, she saw light burning in the sky. A fireball cut across the clouds, growing brighter and louder. It was not a machine, it was a ship, and it was falling. The crash came with thunder and dust. The earth split, and flames rose from the far side of the ruins. She covered her face and ran for shelter, but her heart beat fast, not only with fear, but with something else. Hope. For years she had waited, and now, at last, someone had come. She did not know if the ship carried friend or enemy, but she had to see. Her legs carried her toward the smoke before her mind could stop her. Through broken walls and fallen streets, she moved like a shadow. Her heart was loud in her chest, louder than it had been in many years. When she reached the crash site, she hid behind a broken statue. The fire burned hot, and the ship's body was broken, torn open by the fall. And then she saw him, a human. He pulled himself out of the wreckage, coughing and bleeding. She had never seen a human before, but she had heard stories long ago. Some said humans were dangerous, others said they were weak. But the man she saw was struggling to stand, yet still alive. He looked around, not knowing he was being watched. For the first time in years, she felt both fear and curiosity at the same time. The girl wanted to step forward, to speak, to tell him she was here, but her voice froze in her throat. What if he was cruel? What if he called the machines? What if he left her like everyone else? Her heart pulled her forward, but her fear pulled her back. So she waited, hidden in the ruins, her eyes fixed on the stranger. The human looked tired but not broken. He pulled a small pack from the wreckage and checked the ground for danger. He was careful, alert just like her. She could see in his eyes the same fight she had lived for years, the fight to survive. And in that moment, something inside her whispered, maybe he was not her enemy. Maybe, just maybe, he was the answer to her lonely prayers. The machines were not far. Their red eyes moved in the distance. If they found him, they would destroy him like they tried to destroy her. The girl's hand shook as she held the edge of the broken statue. Should she reveal herself? Should she warn him? Her mind screamed no, but her heart whispered yes. For the first time in years, she was not only thinking about herself. For the first time, she wanted to save another. And that was the moment everything began to change. The girl stayed hidden among the ruins, her body pressed against the cold stone of a broken statue. Smoke rose from the crashed ship, and the human moved slowly through the dust, coughing, his body shaking from the fall. She watched him carefully, her heart beating like a drum in her chest, because this was the first living being she had seen in years. Her world had been empty for so long. Yet now, suddenly, here was someone real, someone breathing, someone alive. The human pulled something from his bag, a small device that sparked with light. He touched his arm where blood ran down, cleaning the wound and wrapping it with a strip of cloth. The girl tilted her head, amazed because she had never seen tools like his before. He was resourceful, and even though hurt, he kept moving, searching for water, shelter, and safety. It was survival, the same as hers, but in a different way. She wanted to step out, to ask him who he was, why he had come, but fear held her still. Her mind whispered that trust was dangerous, that strangers always left, that kindness could turn to cruelty. Yet her heart whispered something else, something softer, a hope she thought she had buried years ago. Maybe this human was different. Maybe he was not like the machines, not like the silence that had eaten her world. The human walked to the edge of the ruins and sat down on a stone. From his pack, he pulled a piece of food, something wrapped in silver paper. He ate half and then, strangely, placed the other half on the ground, as if leaving it for someone unseen. The girl's breath caught, because it felt like he knew she was there. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but her fear fought back. What if it was a trick? What if he was baiting her? What if he wanted her to step out so he could harm her? Hours passed as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the dead city. The human built a small fire using broken wood and pieces of metal. The firelight glowed on his tired face, and he sat close to the warmth, staring into the flames as if remembering something far away. The girl stayed in the darkness, her eyes never leaving him. She had not seen another face in so long, and it felt strange, almost painful, to remember what it was like to not be alone. Then came the sound that froze them both. A low hum, mechanical, heavy. The machines were near, their red eyes glowing in the distance, scanning, hunting. The girl knew their sound too well, knew the death that followed. She saw the human tense, reaching for a tool that looked like a weapon, though small and weak compared to the hunters. He did not know them, not like she did. If he fought them alone, he would die. Her heart pounded as the machines moved closer, their steps crushing the stones. She wanted to run, to hide deeper, but the humans stood in the open, unaware of the paths they would take. She knew the ruins better than anyone. She knew where the shadows were deep, where the ground was safe, where to step to avoid being heard. Her body shook as she whispered to herself, "Do not do this. Do not reveal yourself." But then she saw him lift the small weapon, ready to fight, ready to die. Her fear cracked, and her voice, broken and unused for years, finally escaped her lips. "Hide," she whispered, just loud enough to reach him. The human turned sharply, his eyes searching the shadows. For a moment he looked almost afraid, but then his gaze softened, as if he realized he was not alone. She pointed from her hiding place toward the safer ruins, her hand trembling. The machines moved closer, and there was no more time. The human obeyed, slipping into the shadows she showed him, crouching low as the hunters passed. The machines scanned the air, their red lights sweeping across broken walls. The girl held her breath, not daring to move. The human stayed still beside her, so close she could hear his breathing, rough but steady. Together, they waited as the hunters scanned, searched, and finally moved on, their heavy steps fading into the distance. Only then did the human look at her properly. She stepped out of the dark, slowly, her thin frame covered in scraps of cloth, her eyes wide and glowing faintly in the firelight. The human's expression was not cruel, not sharp, but gentle, curious, and tired. He raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. And then, with a voice rough but kind, he said the first words she had heard in years. "Thank you." The sound of his voice was strange to her, heavy but warm. She looked down, not knowing what to say, her throat dry from silence. The human reached into his pack and pulled out the food he had left earlier. He offered it to her, his hands steady, his eyes calm. Her hunger screamed louder than her fear, and for the first time in years, she reached out, taking something from another hand. The taste was different, strange, but it filled her empty stomach. The human watched her eat, a small smile on his face. He did not laugh at her weakness. He did not turn away from her scars. Instead, he shared with her, even though he had little. It was the first kindness she had felt in so long. The night grew darker, and the fire burned low. The girl sat across from the human, still afraid, still unsure. But deep in her heart, something new began to grow. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the first step toward it. And as the stars shone above, she whispered in her mind, maybe, just maybe, she was not alone anymore. The ruins were quiet again, but the girl knew it would not last. The hunters always returned, always searching, always listening. She sat with the human near the dim fire, her hands tight around her knees, her eyes scanning the shadows. The human was calm but alert, and even though he had survived the crash, she could see his body was weak, his skin pale from the wounds. He needed rest, but rest was dangerous here. The girl had lived with this fear for years, hiding from the machines that never stopped. She knew their patterns, their paths, the way their glowing eyes scanned every corner. She had escaped them many times, but never with another person by her side. Now, if the human made a mistake, they both would die. The thought pressed heavy on her chest, but when she looked at him, she also felt something new: responsibility. The human studied the broken city around them, his eyes sharp. He spoke words in his language, soft and steady, though she did not understand most of them. But his tone was clear. He was asking, planning, thinking of a way to fight or survive. The girl pointed to the far towers, drawing lines in the dust with her finger, showing him where the machines often walked. He nodded slowly, understanding her gestures, his eyes never leaving hers. For the first time, she felt that someone was listening, truly listening. The night grew colder, and the fire burned out. Darkness wrapped around the ruins, and far away, the low hum of machines rose again. The girl's heart jumped, and she grabbed the human's hand, pulling him deeper into the shadows. The sound grew louder, steps shaking the ground, lights cutting through the dark. The hunters were coming back, and this time there were more of them. The human raised his small weapon, holding it steady, but the girl shook her head quickly. She whispered, "No fight," pointing to the ground, to the narrow path she had used for years. He looked at her, uncertain, but then lowered the weapon, trusting her knowledge. Together they moved, crouching low, slipping between walls and fallen beams. The machines scanned, their beams of red light slicing the air, burning against the stone. Every step was danger. Every breath could betray them. The girl led him through the ruins, her movements fast and sure. She knew where the ground was soft, where it echoed, where metal scraps would betray them. She had lived in this silence long enough to know how to use it. The human followed closely, his steps heavy but careful, his eyes always searching the shadows. They reached a broken stairway, and she pulled him up quickly. From the higher ground, they could see the hunters moving below, their red lights like fireflies of death. The human leaned close, whispering in a voice almost too quiet to hear. He asked something, pointing at the machines, then at his weapon. The girl shook her head, her eyes wide. "No fight," she whispered again. "They many." He looked at her, then back at the hunters, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to stand and fight, but he also trusted her enough to wait. They crouched in silence as the machines searched the ruins. Minutes felt like hours, and the girl's heart pounded so loud she was sure the hunters would hear it. Her hand gripped the stone, shaking, but she kept still. The human placed his hand gently on hers, steadying her, and for a moment she felt her fear ease. It was strange to not face this danger alone, to have someone beside her in the dark. Finally, the machines turned away, their lights fading as they moved toward the far towers. The girl let out a shaky breath, her body weak with relief. But the human's eyes stayed hard, watching until the last glow vanished. Then he spoke again, this time slower, pointing at the ground, then at her, then at himself. She understood. He wanted to fight, but only if they fought together. The idea shocked her. For years she had only run, only hidden, only waited. The thought of standing against the hunters had never seemed possible. But now, with the human at her side, the thought felt different. Not safe, not easy, but possible. She nodded slowly, her voice quiet but firm. Together. The human gave a small smile, tired but strong, and she saw the fire in his eyes. He was not like the others who had left her, not like the silence that had swallowed her life. He was willing to stay, willing to fight, willing to trust. As the night faded and the first light of dawn touched the ruins, the girl felt something she had not felt in years. It was not only survival, not only fear, but hope. The machines would come again, stronger, faster, more dangerous. But she was no longer alone, and with the human beside her, the hunt had changed. This time, she would not just hide. This time, she would fight. The first light of morning spilled across the ruins, painting the broken towers with a pale glow. The girl sat on a ledge, her arms wrapped tight around her knees, her eyes fixed on the horizon. For years, every sunrise had only reminded her of loneliness, but now it felt different. Now, there was someone sitting near her, someone who had not vanished into the silence. The human worked quietly beside the broken ship, his hands busy with wires and metal pieces. He spoke to himself sometimes, soft words she did not understand, but the tone was calm, focused, steady. The girl watched, curious, tilting her head as sparks danced from the tool in his hand. She had never seen someone rebuild with such patience. Not in this place where only ruins remained. When he paused, he looked at her and smiled, a small, tired smile that warmed her chest. He held up a piece of food again, offering it to her first before eating any himself. Her stomach tightened, and she accepted, biting into it slowly. It was such a simple thing, but it felt powerful. For years she had taken only what she could steal from the dead city, never shared, never given. Now, for the first time, she felt the meaning of sharing, of trust. The human pointed at her, then at the ruins, then raised his weapon slightly. She understood what he was asking. He wanted her to show him how to move unseen, how to survive the hunt. At first, fear rose inside her, the fear of teaching someone else, of carrying responsibility for their life. But then she remembered the night before, the moment when they had hidden together, his hand steadying hers. That memory gave her courage, and she nodded, slowly. I show. Together, they moved through the ruins, the girl leading, the human following close. She showed him the cracks in the walls where shadows stayed deep, the narrow paths that echoed less when stepped upon. She pointed at the loose stones that could betray them, at the places where the machines scanned most often. The human listened closely, repeating her gestures, copying her movements. She could see his eyes learning, sharp and quick. For the first time, she felt like she had something valuable to give. Not just survival for herself, but survival for another. When the sun reached its highest point, they rested in the shell of an old building. The girl crouched low, drawing shapes in the dust with her finger. She showed him the hunter's path, the places they circled, the routes they always repeated. The human leaned close, nodding, adding his own marks with a stick. He was planning more than escape. He was planning resistance. Her heart raced at the thought, because she had never dared to imagine fighting back. As night returned, the hunters came again, their hum echoing through the streets. The girl and the human hid in the high ruins, watching silently. The human pointed at the machines, then at the ground below, showing how they could trap them. The girl shook her head at first, fear twisting in her stomach. But then she saw his eyes, not reckless but determined, not careless but steady. He was not asking her to risk alone. He was asking her to risk together. The fire of trust grew inside her, small but real. She whispered, "We fight one, only one." The human nodded, and together they planned. The next day, they searched the ruins for broken wires, sharp metal, and heavy stones. The girl showed him how to hide the pieces where the hunters walked. The human added his own skills, shaping traps that sparked with strange energy from his broken ship. By nightfall, they were ready. The machines returned, red lights glowing as they scanned the ruins. The girl's body shook with fear, her breath short and heavy. But the human's calm presence steadied her again. She gripped the stone beside her, waiting, trusting, hoping. When the first machine stepped into the trap, sparks exploded, wires tightened, and the ground gave way. The hunter fell, its light flickering, its body breaking under the weight of the trap. The girl's eyes widened, her heart racing. For the first time in years, she had not only run, she had fought. The human looked at her with pride, his smile brighter now, and whispered one word she understood clearly. "Strong." Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something powerful. She had spent years believing she was weak, broken, left behind. But now, with the human beside her, she felt different. She felt seen, she felt capable, she felt alive. As they sat together in the ruins after the battle, the firelight glowing between them, the girl finally allowed herself to believe in something she had thought was lost forever. Hope. The night was colder than before, and the ruins seemed to breathe with silence. The girl and the human sat near the broken fire pit, their faces lit by faint orange light. They had defeated one machine, but the victory was small compared to what was coming. The girl knew the hunters would not ignore the loss. They would come back, and this time, there would be many more. The human worked on his strange tools, using parts from the broken ship. He tightened wires, shaped metal into traps, and checked his small weapon. The girl watched him closely, helping when she could, carrying stones, gathering sharp scraps. For years she had only hidden, but now she was building, preparing, fighting. The feeling was new, heavy but strong, and it gave her courage. As dawn touched the ruins, they moved through the city together. They set traps in narrow alleys, placed stones above broken arches, stretched wires between fallen beams. Every piece of ruin became a weapon in their hands. The girl showed him where the machines always walked, and the human listened, building his plans with her knowledge. It felt strange to stand side by side, working not just for survival, but for something greater, resistance. When the sun fell again, the hum of the hunters returned, louder, heavier, many more than before. The ground shook as they entered the ruins, red lights cutting through the night. The girl's heart pounded her chest, fear rising like fire. But this time she was not alone, and when she looked at the human, she saw no fear in his eyes, only determination. That look gave her strength. The first machine stepped into the alley where wires waited. The trap snapped tight, sparks burning, metal twisting. The hunter crashed to the ground, its red eyes flickering before fading. Another stepped forward, but stones fell from above, smashing its body apart. The ruins became alive with noise. Explosions, cracks, the sound of metal breaking. For the first time, the hunters were not only hunters, they were prey. The girl moved quickly, guiding the human through the shadows. She pointed out dangers, warned him when the hunters turned, showed him where the next trap was ready. Together, they struck again and again. But the hunters were many, more than she had ever seen. Their red lights filled the streets. Their heavy steps shook the ground like thunder. And slowly, their traps began to run out. The human raised his weapon, firing bursts of light that burned into the machines. The girl grabbed a sharp piece of metal and threw it with all her strength, piercing a hunter's glowing eye. Her arms shook, her breath heavy, but she did not stop. She was no longer just a shadow hiding in ruins. She was fighting. Then the largest machine appeared, taller than the rest, its body covered in armor. It moved with heavy steps, crushing stone beneath its weight. The girl froze, fear gripping her chest. She had never seen one this strong, and for a moment, the hope she had felt began to slip away. The human shouted something, his voice sharp and urgent. He pulled her behind a wall as the giant hunter's red beam cut across the street, burning through stone. The ground shook, dust falling around them. The human looked at her, his eyes steady, and pressed something into her hand, a piece of metal wired with sparks. He pointed at the hunter's legs, then at her, then back at himself. She understood. He wanted them to strike together. Her body trembled, but she nodded. Together they ran, darting through shadows, the giant hunter turning slowly to find them. The human climbed onto the ruins, drawing its attention, while the girl slipped behind, her small body fast and unseen. Her heart raced as she reached the hunter's legs, pressing the sparking device against the joint. She leapt back as the explosion roared, shaking the ground. The machine staggered, one leg broken, its light flickering. The human fired at its core, his weapon burning through the weakened armor. With a final crash, the giant hunter fell, its red glow fading into nothing. Silence filled the ruins again, broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing. The girl dropped to her knees, her chest heaving, her arms shaking. For a moment she thought she would faint, but then she felt the human's hand on her shoulder, steady and strong. He smiled at her, his face tired but proud. "You saved me," he said slowly, his voice soft but clear enough for her to understand. Her eyes widened, because no one had ever spoken those words to her before. She had always been the one waiting to be saved, always the one left behind. But now, for the first time, she was the one who gave strength, the one who made survival possible. Her heart swelled, not with fear, but with something brighter, something powerful. The last fires of the ruined machines burned low, their red eyes gone. The girl looked at the human, and in his gaze she saw not pity, not weakness, but respect. The battle had changed everything. They were no longer strangers hiding in shadows. They were partners, fighters, survivors. And as the stars filled the sky above the silent planet, the girl finally believed what she had never dared to hope. She was not weak. She was not broken. She was not alone. The ruins were quiet again, but the silence felt different now. Where once the girl had only heard loneliness, she now heard the echo of victory. The broken machines lay scattered across the streets, their red eyes dark, their bodies smoking in the dust. She and the human had survived, and for the first time, she felt like they had done more than just escape. They had won. The girl sat on a stone wall, her body tired, her hands trembling from the fight. The human worked nearby, pulling wires and pieces of metal from the destroyed hunters. He spoke softly to himself, his voice steady, as if planning something new. She watched him, her heart filled with questions. Why had he come here? What did he want? And why did he stay with her when he could leave her behind? That night, they built a small fire again, the flames flickering against the broken towers. The human pulled out a device from his pack, something she had never seen before. It was cracked and broken from the crash, but he worked with care, fixing the wires connecting strange lights. She tilted her head, curious, moving closer to watch. The human looked at her and then pointed to the sky. He said a word slowly, one she understood, signal. Her eyes widened, and her chest filled with a rush of emotion. A signal to the stars, to his people, to the world beyond her silent planet. For so long she had looked at the sky and whispered to the stars, hoping for an answer. Now, for the first time, there was a chance the stars might whisper back. Together, they searched the ruins for more pieces, broken wires, scraps of power cells from the hunters. The girl climbed high walls, moving quickly where the human could not. He guided her with hand signals, pointing where to place the metal. It was strange, working like this, two lives moving as one. She had never known such connection, such trust. By midnight, the device was ready, a small tower of broken metal and glowing sparks. The human adjusted it carefully, his hands steady despite the wounds on his arms. Finally, he pressed a button, and the device hummed with life. A beam of light shot upward, thin but steady, piercing the darkness of the sky. The girl's breath caught as she watched it rise, reaching higher and higher, disappearing into the endless stars. Her eyes filled with tears. For years she had begged the sky for someone to hear her, and now, at last, the sky was listening. The human looked at her, his face soft, and said quietly, "They will come." The words wrapped around her heart like a promise. She nodded, whispering back, "Hope." But with hope came fear. The hunters were gone for now, but more would come, stronger, faster. And what if the signal never reached anyone? What if no one answered? The girl stared at the stars, her chest tight. She had waited so long for her people, but they had never returned. Could she trust the promise of strangers she had never met? The human seemed to understand her fear without words. He sat beside her, pointing at the stars again, then at himself, then at her. His meaning was simple, even without language. Family is not only blood, it is who stands with you. She felt her heart shake at the thought, because no one had ever stood with her before. Yet here was this human, who had crashed from the sky and still chose to fight beside her. The signal pulsed through the night, reaching farther and farther. The girl leaned against the broken wall, her eyes never leaving the stars. For the first time, she did not look at them with despair, but with wonder. The stars were no longer empty. They were alive with possibility. And deep inside, she began to believe that her future was no longer tied to the ruins of her past. The human rested nearby, his eyes closing for a moment, his breathing steady. The girl stayed awake, watching over him. Her body was tired, but her heart refused to sleep. She whispered to herself, "No alone, not anymore." The words felt strange on her tongue, but powerful, like a promise she was making to her own soul. As the night turned to morning, the beam of light still shone into the sky. Somewhere far away, maybe someone had seen it, maybe ships were turning, maybe help was on the way. But even if no one came, she knew something had already changed forever. She was no longer waiting for her parents, no longer waiting for her people. She had found something else, something stronger. She had found hope in the kindness of a stranger who had become her companion. The stars above were no longer silent. To her, they were singing. The beam of light still reached into the stars, cutting through the endless dark sky. The girl stood beside the human, her thin frame glowing faintly in the firelight, her eyes fixed on the heavens. She had waited for years, trapped in silence, lost in loneliness, but tonight was different. Tonight she had dared to hope, and hope had answered. As dawn broke, a low hum filled the air, but this time it was not the sound of hunters. The girl's heart jumped, fear rising, until she saw it. Shapes moving high above, wings of metal glowing in the sunlight. Ships, real ships, alive and powerful, descending from the sky like messengers of a forgotten dream. Her breath caught, and her chest filled with emotions she could not name. For the first time in years, she was seeing salvation, not destruction. The human stood tall beside her, his face calm, but his eyes shining with relief. He touched her shoulder, pointing upward, speaking softly, "My people." She looked at him, her lips trembling, and then back at the ships. They were not her people, not the ones she had waited for, but her heart told her it did not matter anymore. Because these were the people who had heard their call, who had come because of the signal, because of him. The ships landed with thunder and wind, dust rising across the ruins. Figures stepped out. Humans, many of them, their faces marked by helmets and their hands carrying strange tools. The girl shrank back, fear gripping her, her mind screaming that more strangers meant more pain. But the human stepped forward, lifting his hand high, speaking in strong words she did not understand. The other humans lowered their weapons, their voices softer now, their eyes curious as they looked at her. She felt their gaze, but this time it was not cold or cruel. It was careful, cautious, almost respectful. The human reached back and took her hand, his grip firm. She froze, staring at their joined hands, and then slowly looked at his face. There was no demand in his touch, only reassurance, only a silent promise that he would not leave her. Her fear eased, and for the first time, she stepped forward with him, not alone, but as part of something new. The other human spoke quickly, setting up equipment, scanning the ruins, gathering supplies. The girl did not understand their words, but she understood their actions. They were not here to destroy, they were here to help. She sat quietly, watching as they worked, her eyes wide with wonder. The world she had known, the silent planet of shadows and hunters, was changing before her eyes. And though fear still lingered in her heart, it no longer ruled her. That night, she sat with the human by the fire one last time. The stars above were brighter now, no longer silent, no longer cruel. The human pointed to the sky, speaking softly again. He said words she could not understand, but his tone was clear. It was a promise of future and new life. She nodded, her eyes glowing faintly, and whispered back, "Together." When the time came to leave, the girl stood at the edge of the ship's ramp, her body shaking. Behind her was the only world she had ever known, broken, ruined, filled with memories of sorrow. Ahead of her was the unknown, a sky filled with stars, a future she could not yet imagine. Her heart pounded as she hesitated, torn between fear of the new and pain of the old. The human turned, standing at the top of the ramp, his hands stretched out to her. His eyes were steady, his face calm, waiting, not forcing, not demanding. Her chest filled with heat, with tears, with courage. And then she stepped forward, placing her hand in his. Together, they entered the ship, the doors closing behind them. The engines roared, fire pushing against the earth. The girl pressed her face to the window, watching as the ruins fell away, smaller and smaller, until they were only dust. Her world was gone, but her heart was no longer tied to its silence. She was leaving behind loneliness, leaving behind fear. And in its place, she carried hope, trust, and the kindness she had found in humanity. The ship rose higher, cutting through clouds, reaching the open black of space. Stars filled the sky once more, but this time they did not feel cold. They felt alive, like companions, like friends, like promises waiting to be kept. The girl whispered to herself, words she had never dared to believe before, "I am not alone." And in that moment, with the human by her side and the stars shining bright above, the alien girl who had waited for years finally found her new beginning, not in the return of her people, but in the kindness of strangers who had become her family. Her story was no longer about waiting, but about living. A new dawn had come, and it belonged to her.